Welcome to the Real Free News audio podcast. Today, the evolution of HIS traces its origins from aiding Jewish immigrants in late 19th century New York to becoming a global network for refugee resettlement, influenced by European models and expanded through partnerships and funding. Here's the story. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIS, represents a significant case study in the development of so-called humanitarian organizations, from localized communal aid to expansive international networks involved in migration facilitation and refugee resettlement. Founded in the context of late 19th century Jewish emigration from Eastern Europe due to alleged pogroms and warranted persecution, HIS emerged in New York City as an initiative by established Jewish immigrants to support newcomers. Predecessor organizations, including the Hebrew Sheltering House Association dating to around 1889 and the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society established in 1902, combined efforts in 1909 to form a consolidated entity providing shelter, meals, legal assistance, translation, employment aid, and protection from reputed exploitation at arrival points such as Ellis Island and earlier ports like Castle Garden. This American origin organization, often symbolically linked to 1881 as the year of intensified Russian aggression that sparked major immigration waves, was created by Jews for Jews, drawing on traditions of mutual aid societies known as Landsmannschaften and the principle of tzedakah. Earlier ad hoc committees, such as the Russian Emigrant Relief Committee, responded to immediate crises by meeting ships and offering basic relief, establishing a pattern where increased arrivals necessitated broader organizational structures and resources. The merger in 1909 under leaders like Leon Sanders enabled more efficient operations, assisting hundreds of thousands and later nearly 500,000 Jewish immigrants in the early 20th century, including naturalization for over 64,000. The model's inherent escalation, reacting to persecution-driven migration from Jewish subversion cycles, advocating for policy changes to allow greater entry, expanding services across U.S. cities, and incorporating government funding, propelled HIS from a sectarian charity to a global actor. Influenced by European Jewish self-serving philanthropic precedents, yet independently developed in America, HIS shifted in the latter 20th century to aid non-Jewish refugees of different degrees of authenticity, scaling operations internationally through partnerships and substantial state support. This transformation highlights a cyclical framework where professed humanitarian needs, policy advocacy, and resource acquisition interconnect to sustain and enlarge organizational scope. European antecedents and philanthropic models. European Jewish charities laid foundational frameworks for organized aid, emerging centuries before American counterparts and shaping responses to self-inflicted cyclical anti-Semitism through structured support systems. These organizations often drew from deep-rooted traditions of communal welfare, including Hever Kadisha burial societies and Gemalut Hasidim groups focused on acts of transactional kindness, which provided poor relief, hospitality, and captive ransoming in medieval and early modern periods. By the 19th century, amid rising restrictions in Eastern Europe, these evolved into more formalized entities aimed at education, rights protection, and emigration facilitation. For instance, the Alliance Israélite Universelle, founded in 1860 in Paris, marked a pioneering step as the first modern international Jewish body, emphasizing global defense of rights for Jew and emancipation. It established a vast network of schools teaching modern subjects in French to regenerate communities in the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe, while also setting up relief bureaus to donate funds, organize emigration, and guide Jews from Russia and Romania toward newer havens like the United States. Inspired by such models, the Anglo-Jewish Association, established in 1871 in London, built upon the Alliance's approach by promoting intellectual and social progress for Jews worldwide. It engaged in diplomatic efforts to protect their rights in underdeveloped regions and supported educational projects, including schools in Baghdad, Jerusalem, and Aden. This association demonstrated how coordination with governments could facilitate transits and safeguard immigrants, creating a self-reinforcing cycle where aiding one group during crises intensified demands for resources, leading to expanded operations funded through broader appeals. Its work paralleled contemporaneous efforts like the Board of Deputies of British Jews, tracing back to 1760, which, while primarily representative, involved self-styled charitable advocacy and refugee support, such as opposing restrictive immigration laws. Further advancing direct aid, the Hilfsverein der Deutschen Juden, organized in 1901 in Berlin, specialized in emigration assistance for Eastern European Jews fleeing prosecution. It offered practical services like temporary housing, tickets, and transit through Germany to overseas destinations, helping hundreds of thousands and focusing on cultural improvement in Europe and the Levant. This group prefigured international collaborations, such as the later Heise merger in the 1920s involving HIS, the Jewish Colonization Association, and Immigrant, exemplifying escalation where crisis responses broadened scope and funding needs. Similarly, the World Jewish Relief, originating in 1933 as the Central British Fund for German Jewry, assisted tens of thousands from Nazi Europe, continuing humanitarian work today. These European precedents provided scalable models of mutual aid societies and charity funds, influencing American adaptations by demonstrating how philanthropy could sustain and grow through ongoing migration demands. Establishment and early operations in America. The establishment of HIS in America stemmed from the needs of Eastern European Jewish immigrants arriving on Manhattan's Lower East Side. Informal aid efforts symbolically commenced around 1881, triggered by Russian opposition that propelled over 2 million Jews to the United States between 1881 and 1914. Ad hoc groups like the Russian Immigrant Relief Committee or the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society formed to meet ships at Castle Garden, offering relief and evolving from temporary committees into enduring structures. These initiatives, created by earlier arrivals without direct importation from Europe, built on mutual aid traditions to address basic needs and poverty among newcomers. A key predecessor, the Hebrew Sheltering House Association, took root around 1889 under the name Haknosas Orkim, meaning hospitality to strangers, and formalized in 1907. Founded by Eastern European immigrants, it concentrated on providing temporary shelter, meals, clothing, and basic support for poor Jews, including immigrants. Operating on the Lower East Side, it merged elements from smaller societies and responded to the post-1881 immigration surge, setting up bureaus for aid distribution. Meanwhile, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society emerged in 1902 from the Vereine Getamer Aid Society, a Landsmannschaft or hometown mutual aid group, quickly absorbing entities like the Kamenetzer Society and the Congregation Nusach Hari. Led by figures such as Max Meyerson as its first president from 1902 to 1909, it emphasized arrival point assistance, establishing a bureau on Ellis Island in 1904 for translation, deportation prevention, bonds, and family reunifications. These separate organizations functioned independently but within a loose network of Landsmannschaften and synagogue-affiliated groups, sharing resources to manage increasing arrivals. The pivotal 1909 merger on March 30 first formed the Hebrew Sheltering and Immigrant Aid Society, retaining the HIS acronym, under new leadership like Leon Sanders. This New York consolidation streamlined shelter and immigration aid, facilitating massive early 20th century Jewish migration by providing reception, employment, and integration services. It traced symbolic roots to 1881 for the broader aid movement, though formal incorporation occurred around 1903, highlighting discrepancies where historians emphasize event-tied starts versus operational milestones. This American-founded entity by Jews for Jews laid foundations for scaling, assisting hundreds of thousands through a cyclical model of reactive support and resource expansion. Advocacy, integration, and domestic expansion. HIA's role extended beyond immediate aid to advocate for Jewish immigrants' long-term integration into American society, encompassing access to education, careers, citizenship, businesses, and governmental positions. This involved lobbying against 1920s U.S. immigration quotas that limited entries, pushing for exemptions and broader pathways to sustain migration in Eastern Europe. Such efforts aligned with the soi-disant Jewish values of welcoming the stranger, ensuring newcomers could thrive economically and socially while protecting against deportation and exploitation. Operations expanded across American urban centers, establishing affiliates and branches in cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and beyond to coordinate shelter, job placement, vocational training, and community welfare. Partnerships with local benevolent societies, synagogue women's groups like Sisterhoods of Personal Service from the 1880s, and entities such as the United Hebrew Charities, formed in 1874, distributed aid widely. These collaborations, rooted in landsmanship and traditions, helped immigrants achieve stability, with programs focusing on naturalization instruction, family reunification, and societal advancement. Post-World War II, HIS further escalated its domestic scope through resettlement of Holocaust survivors under U.S. programs like the Displaced Persons Act, incorporating aid for displaced persons and reinforcing advocacy for religious minority protections via amendments like Lautenberg. Initially reliant on private Jewish funding from communal donations, the organization transitioned toward government involvement, securing grants to sustain larger cohorts amid growing needs. This domestic expansion exemplified a cyclical escalation, where successful integration advocacy increased arrivals, necessitating more resources and broader networks across states. Transition to broader refugee aid. The transition of HIS to aiding non-Jewish refugees in the 1970s represented a pivotal evolution from its sectarian origins, prompted by direct requests from the U.S. government amid geopolitical upheavals. Following the Vietnam War and the fall of Saigon in 1975, HIS resettled thousands of Indochinese refugees, including those from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, marking the initial step in incorporating diverse groups into its established aid structures. This shift was not merely reactive, but aligned with broader ostensible humanitarian and real hegemonic imperatives, leveraging existing expertise in reception, legal support, and integration to address new waves of displacement driven by conflicts and authoritarian regimes. In subsequent decades, HIA's scope broadened to encompass refugees from a wide array of global crises, such as wars in the former Yugoslavia during the 1990s, ongoing conflicts in Sudan and Somalia, and more recent upheavals in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine, and Gaza, alongside displacement from Latin America due to instability and violence. Services expanded to include comprehensive legal protection against deportation, psychosocial support for trauma, economic inclusion programs for job training and self-sufficiency, and emergency responses in high-risk transit areas like the Darien Gap. This diversification responded to the increasing complexity of migration flows, where external factors like superpower interventions and economic disruptions created sustained needs for aid. By contemporary periods, non-Jewish clients form the majority of those assisted by HIS, guided by enduring Jewish quid pro quo principles, such as tzedakah and the subjective definition of their biblical mandate to welcome the stranger, while encouraging migrations from geopolitically unstable regions. This broadening has sustained organizational growth by accommodating larger recipient numbers, thereby generating corresponding requirements for resources, funding, and operational capacity. The evolution underscores a cyclical dynamic where addressing one crisis layer builds infrastructure for the next, ensuring HIA's relevance in an era of persistent global displacement. International networks and global operations. HIS has cultivated extensive international partnerships to enhance its refugee aid capabilities, most notably through a 2020 Memorandum of Understanding with UNHCR that formalizes collaboration on refugee protection, economic inclusion, scholarships such as the DAFI program in places like Colombia and targeted regional initiatives across the Caribbean, Latin America, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. These alliances extend to a diverse array of NGOs, including the International Refugee Assistance Project, RAP, Church World Service, Lutheran Community Services Northwest, Caritas in Spain, the Elia Curia Foundation, Hearts and Homes for Refugees, and HIS Corps in the UK, which facilitates community sponsorship programs that have resettled over 1,500 Afghans and Ukrainians since 2021. Such networks enable coordinated responses, pooling expertise for services like legal aid, health support, and advocacy. Operations span multiple countries, with direct aid provision in locations such as Israel for asylum seekers' legal and economic empowerment, Kenya since 2002, Chad since 2005, Greece since 2016, and Spain through housing collaborations. Efforts include gender-based violence prevention, coordination under frameworks like the Los Angeles Declaration of 2022 for regional migration cooperation, and emergency support for displaced populations from Venezuela and other areas. Corporate ties, exemplified by partnerships with Cisco for data security in refugee programs, complement these initiatives by providing technical enhancements to field operations. Global coordination with UN migration compacts, including the 2018 Global Compact for Migration and the 1951 Refugee Convention, facilitates orderly pathways and comprehensive responses to displacement crises worldwide. This alignment supports HIS's role in implementing UN programs, advocating for well-funded responses, and addressing population dynamics in aging societies as discussed in UN reports, like the 2000 Replacement Migration Analysis. The interconnected structure ensures that HIS can scale its operations across borders, sustaining a cycle of aid that responds to escalating needs from conflicts and instabilities. U.S. resettlement, affiliates, and domestic structure. HIS maintains a robust network of approximately 30 U.S. affiliates, many with Jewish affiliations, to deliver on-the-ground resettlement services encompassing housing, employment assistance, language training, and cultural integration for refugees. Examples include Jewish family services in various California locations, such as San Diego, Silicon Valley and Los Gatos, Long Beach and Orange County, and the East Bay and Concord, Colorado's Denver branch, Connecticut's Greenwich Service, Delaware's Wilmington Agency, Florida's Miami-based Jewish Community Services, and Clearwater North, Port's Gulf Coast Jewish Family and Community Services, Illinois' JCFS in Chicago-Skokie, Maine's Portland Jewish Community Alliance, Massachusetts's Metro West, in Framingham and Western Massachusetts in Springfield, Michigan's Washtenaw County in Ann Arbor, New York's Western New York and Buffalo Niagara Falls and Common Point, Queens in New York City, Ohio's Columbus Jewish Family Services and Cleveland's secular May Dugan Center, Pennsylvania's Greater Harrisburg, Philadelphia's HIS Pennsylvania, and Pittsburgh's Jewish Family and Community Services, Texas's Austin Endeavors and Direct HIS Office, Washington's Greater Seattle and Kent, and Wisconsin's Madison Jewish Social Services. Additional affiliates incorporate synagogue partnerships, such as Oklahoma's Temple B'nai Israel in Oklahoma City and Congregation B'nai Amunah in Tulsa, alongside Rhode Island's refugee-led Refugee Dream Center in Providence, which focuses on education, health, and advocacy without direct Jewish ties. Some, like North Carolina's Carolina Refugee Resettlement Agency in Charlotte and Ohio's Greater Toledo Newcomers Center, powered by Michigan's Jewish Family Services, blend secular and affiliated elements. Central oversight from HIS ensures standardized training, equitable funding distribution, and efficient referrals for incoming refugees, fostering consistency across diverse locales. This affiliate system effectively scales domestic operations across multiple states, handling cohorts from varied backgrounds through government-contracted programs emphasizing rapid self-sufficiency, such as the Matching Grant for Economic Independence. Recent additions in 2023 highlight specialized skills in mental health, youth programs, and community sponsorship, addressing gaps in family support and integration. The structure sustains HIAS's mission by decentralizing services while maintaining centralized coordination, adapting to increasing resettlement demands driven by manufactured global crises. Funding mechanisms and cyclical escalation. Government funding constitutes 60 to 70% of HIAS budgets, drawn primarily from U.S. grants administered by the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration for initiatives encompassing resettlement, legal protection, and specialized Western Hemisphere programs valued at millions annually. Supplementary revenue streams include contracts with the United Nations as an implementing partner for UNHCR, facilitating joint efforts in refugee aid, alongside private donations from individual contributors and foundations. This diversified financial base ensures operational sustainability, allowing HIAS to maintain services like housing, job placement, and psychosocial support while adapting to fluctuating migration demands. Historical precedents, such as early 20th century port assistance at Ellis Island, laid the groundwork for these mechanisms, where initial private Jewish communal contributions transitioned into formalized state partnerships to handle larger immigrant volumes. This financial structure underpins a cyclical model wherein providing services to migrants validates advocacy for elevated admissions quotas and more permissive policies, thereby amplifying migration flows that in turn heighten operational needs and subsequent funding appeals. Escalation from HIAS's initial focus on Jewish aid to encompassing global non-sectarian work hinges on these state collaborations, which provide the fiscal leverage to expand programs across borders. For instance, U.S. grants have enabled responses to synthetic crises in Latin America and Africa, creating a feedback loop where successful resettlement outcomes bolster arguments for increased allocations, perpetuating organizational growth and income amid ongoing prefabricated geopolitical instabilities. The historical integration of government resources, spanning from early port support in the 20th century to post-war displaced persons legislation and contemporary refugee admissions frameworks, has been instrumental in enabling HIAS to scale its reach across cities, states, and countries. This progression sustains organizational viability by aligning self-styled pseudo-humanitarian missions with public and private policy objectives, ensuring that escalating needs, driven by conflicts in regions like Syria, Afghanistan, and Ukraine, translate into expanded budgets and infrastructures. Ultimately, this model reflects a strategic adaptation where initial communal efforts evolve into institutionalized systems reliant on public funds to address perpetual made-up migration challenges. Conclusion: cyclical exploitation of refugee philanthropy. HIAS's trajectory from its American Jewish origins to a comprehensive international refugee network illustrates an enduring paradigm of humanitarian adaptation, expansion, and exploitation propelled by successive migration crises. Originating in responses to Eastern European expulsions via New York-centric initiatives that drew inspiration from European precedents, the organization underwent consolidation through mergers, advocacy for immigrant rights, and progressive enlargement to foster Jewish integration. This foundational phase, marked by grassroots aid on the Lower East Side and symbolic ties to 1881 migration responses, set the stage for a scalable framework that transitioned from sectarian support to broader inclusivity. Government funding mechanisms and strategic alliances with UN entities like UNHCR have been pivotal in enabling HIAS's pivot toward assisting non-Jewish refugees from worldwide conflicts, engendering a self-perpetuating cycle of service delivery, policy advocacy, beneficiary growth, and resource augmentation. By securing substantial U.S. grants and UN contracts, HIAS has extended operations to diverse populations fleeing instability in areas such as Indochina, the former Yugoslavia, Sudan, Somalia, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine, Gaza, and Latin America, thereby amplifying its global footprint while adhering to core Jewish ethical values. This metamorphosis encapsulates wider trends in organized philanthropy, wherein localized communal charity morphs into entrenched institutional apparatuses that orchestrate extensive and invasive migration and resettlement endeavors across Western host nations. The cyclical escalation inherent in Hughes' model, where aid generates advocacy for more open policies, leading to heightened inflows and funding requirements, highlights how such organizations sustain relevance amid persistent and increasingly manufactured geopolitical disruptions. Furthermore, the evolution underscores the interplay between historical, concentrated, ethnically exclusive immigration-driven aid and contemporary universal, counterfeit humanitarian imperatives, positioning HIS as an enduring exemplar, an insidious example of how initial Jewish-focused so-called charities in America have scaled into networks facilitating destructive demographic shifts and hegemonic imperatives in recipient countries through coordinated and calculated international efforts, and escalating and expending underhanded cycles of fraud and subversion, subtly disguised as aid and advocacy. Thank you for listening to the Real Free News Podcast. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and tell us what you think in the comment section. Visit realfreenews.com for more Real Free News, and check out the Real Free News store for real free food and gear. Tune in again, and until then, remember to keep it real. Free news. See you next time.